Welcome to the Starr Motorcycle Podcast with your host, award-winning filmmaker and AMA Hall of Famer, Peter Starr. Starr Motorcycle Podcast is brought to you by Dunlop Motorcycle Tires and Motostar.com books and videos. Full details and promo videos for Peter Starr's 2 coffee table books with DVDs, Taking It to the Limit and Motorcycle Traveler, the anniversary edition of his multi-award winning movie, Take It to the Limit, and his first motorcycle film, Bad Rock, are available through Motostar.com. That is Motostarr.com.
The 1983 Supercross season unveiled what was perhaps the most potent 1-2 punch in racing history.
I first met my guest today in 1983, in one of the unique years of motocross, and when I decided to make a film about him. At that time, it was obvious to me that he was on the verge of real motocross stardom. And when he won the Supercross series, I felt justified in following him through the outdoor series, where he won the 250cc championship, and later that year, won the Wrangler Super Series in the only year it was held. He won the Triple Crown of Motocross in 1983. David went on to win more in the following seasons until 1987, when he had the most debilitating of motocross accidents, resulting in paralysis from the waist down. For many, as we've witnessed over the years, this could have been the end of a meaningful life, but not so for David Bailey. Using the same dedication and drive both mentally and physically, David picked up the pieces, regathered his desire to win, and in no uncertain terms, continued his professional life. First as a television commentator, a magazine columnist, but what is most important, entered what is perhaps the most demanding of all sports, the Hawaii Ironman Triathlon, where he became Ironman World Champion in his division 13 years after his accident. David Bailey has inspired many over the years, me included. So it gives me great pleasure to have him as my guest today. David Bailey, I just want to tell you, it's been a long time since we spent some time together, but back in the 80s, we spent a lot of time together, and it was a time that I grew to like you a lot. Since then, I've grown to admire you a great deal, and I just want to say at the onset that when I was diagnosed with cancer back in 2004 and decided that I had to look elsewhere for therapies and treatment other than what the doctor was offering me, you were an inspiration to me, and you and other people like you, because the decision you made to make of your life something that was taken away from you was such an inspiration to me to look elsewhere. And that was 17 years ago now, and I'm still here kicking ass and taking names, and partly because of the inspiration I got from you, and I want to thank you for that up front. I don't think I've ever told you that before.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that that I was able to be some sort of a source of inspiration and to press on. I got stuck for a while, and you have to look elsewhere and get your inspiration from different places, but you never know what you're going to come across. And a little bit like motocross, you figure out a way to get over and through it in the smoothest and best and most sensible way. In such a fashion, I think for me, when I was getting good at racing, I wanted to do it in such a way that I could not cross my fingers. I could get through it and then help somebody else to do it. I always thought it was fun to pass things that I'd learned on to others, so I'm glad that that helped.
I'm sure there's a lot of racers out there that took a lot of lessons from you and learned a lot from you, and has gone on to do well. But I don't want to dwell on that subject, because it's although being inspiring is important, I think, and I tend to look at that as well in my life, as people suffer from the same things that I suffer from, and they can learn from me. But you've had such an illustrious career, and the 1983 year, I cannot forget that time we had, and I cannot forget that whole year because you won 3 trophies that year that nobody's ever done before, and nobody ever did it afterwards, because it was only 1 year. The Supercross, Outdoor Motocross, and the Wrangler Super Series. Let's start with the 1983, because that was a very, very happy year. Let's remember that for a little while. Tell me some thoughts about it.
Well, heading into 83 I was thinking I was going to be a top 5 guy, win some heat races in Supercross, maybe win some motos outdoors, but maybe not a title contender guy. And then when this Triple Crown thing came about, and there was a consistency aspect to it, I thought, well, I might not get a title, but I might be able to get that. And so I had cut my national number, which you had to earn back then. My first one was 93, then I went to 45, about in half, then to 23, then 11. And in 1983, I was running number 11, figuring I'd probably cut that in half, be number 4 or 5 or 6. And I won Anaheim, the first race. And I almost got goosebumps now just thinking about it, chasing Brock Glover around for a little while in front of a sellout crowd, thinking, he's not getting away from me, and we got a big lead over third, and it's the first race of the season, and Hannah's back there somewhere, and he's not gaining. And it just started with a dream. I won my first Supercross, the first time I ever raced at Anaheim Stadium, and I won it. And Brock gave me a compliment walking through the tunnel up to the press box after the races, going, man, you were smooth, and I couldn't catch you. He got squirrely through the whoop section, and I got by. And I just thought, I'm one of the guys now. I'm not back there like the good guys are up ahead of me and I'm getting closer, nipping at their heels. I was one of them. And so the next round going into Seattle was a doubleheader. And I was leading it and Bob got by me, like I figured would happen at the first round. The same thing the second night, a replay. He got first both nights, so his comeback was official because he'd been out a while. And I backed it up, finished right behind him in second both nights, and thought, well, that's kind of how it ought to be. Bob's the guy, and I'm the next guy. And all season we were, 1-2 quite a bit. And he was faster, definitely faster. But there were times when I could get him, and I was consistent, and I knew it was going to be a great season just from the first few rounds.
The interesting part about that Supercross series, I was in the first one. In fact, I think Bruce Penhall was the narrator that interviewed you afterwards. And I remember that interview, and I was thinking, at that time, we've got a movie in this guy. So I remember calling Honda and saying, look, I think we should make a movie about this guy. And I didn't know you at all at that point. I just saw that, and I listened to that interview you did with Bruce Penhall on the winner's rostrum there. And then Seattle. And then what happened after that?
Well, it was a break, I think, after Seattle. So we did Anaheim and Seattle pretty quickly after, a doubleheader. And I believe we had a week off, and I went back to Virginia and thought, okay, well, now we're going to Atlanta and then Daytona. And I grew up in Florida a lot and raced in the Florida Series, and my stepdad, Gary Bailey, was building the Supercross track at Daytona, so I grew up there. Watched Hannah the first time I ever saw him live in '76 in the Supercross, and I had a lot of history there, a lot of fans in Atlanta. So I thought, well, the momentum that went to Hannah is going to come back to me. And then the skies opened up in Atlanta, and it became the muddiest race that I've ever raced, ever. The whole stadium floor was covered in water. The AMA was thinking maybe we're going to cancel it, and a few guys were like, no, we're doing it. So we all had to do it, and I led the first 3/4 of a lap, almost a whole lap, and I had to guess where the ruts were because it was just water filling the whole thing. And I found a deep hole, couldn't get out of it. Hannah ended up second, I ended up ninth, and he took a bigger points lead. Heading into Daytona, he was expecting to win Daytona. I wasn't expecting to win it. I was just happy to be there and figuring if I was on the podium, I'd be happy. And he won it. My teammate O'Mara was second, I was third, and we swept it. And I was happy with that. Like I said, heading into the season, I figured, well, let's be a top 5 guy and win some stuff here and there, and I already won Anaheim, so I'm still kind of riding that. And for Hannah to be winning like that wasn't surprising to me at all. I felt like he was the guy. He was the fastest. I respected him a lot. I knew that he worked hard, and I saw him in practice and in testing, and he was so fast that I didn't expect to beat him at the races. So when he was cocky, which he was at Daytona, then you're not going to beat him, probably. And so I was fine with third. But as the season progressed after that, I started realizing that I can hang in there and stay with him and have a shot at things, you know, in the overall tally of it all. So I just stayed close as I could.
And when did the season turn around?
There was a race in Dallas at the Cotton Bowl, and they were testing the lights or doing something like that, and then they had an additional press day. And so I went back out there, and I rolled my foot off the peg and my right ankle, and basically just broke it. I don't remember what the exact injury was, but it hurt so bad. And I couldn't do the race at all. The team trainer at Honda, Jeff Spencer, he put me on a plane to Pasadena to some special doctor, and I missed the race altogether. I didn't get to ride a heat or any of that. I wasn't even there. And the Nationals and the Supercross overlapped back then. It wasn't indoor and then a break and then outdoor. So the very next race was the first National of the season, I think it was. And maybe it was the third National. Like I said, they overlapped. So I wasn't expected to be back on a bike for 4 to 6 weeks, and or even able to walk. And this hotshot doctor in Pasadena, he had me able to walk, and they put my foot in a plastic cast in a bigger size boot, and I went out and went 5-2 for the overall win, won my first National. And Hannah was sick, I think. And so that kind of was like a horrible swing for me to have missed Dallas. But then at the very next race at the National to win it with a lot of problems. Like I wasn't even expected to be there. So that gave me that kind of idea in the back of my mind that, you know, this is a long season, stuff happens to people, and, you know, I didn't even think I was going to be here, and here I won this thing. So that consistency idea crept back in. I didn't expect to win all the races, but I expected to be there at the end.
Is it an endurance mentality that brought that about, to win that entire season?
I think it was, for me, I wasn't expecting to be the fastest guy and win the most races. But I knew that whoever was going to be doing that was going to have off races. And there'd be mud races like we'd already had in Atlanta. And there'd be really hot ones and sandy ones. And when the conditions are, you know, fairly normal, I felt like I was, you know, up there in the top 3, maybe not the guy winning, but if it was muddy, I felt like I could win because I practiced in crazy conditions in Virginia. And I knew I could do really well if it was hot. And so I knew that if it was extreme conditions and then injuries being extreme, that I could get through that stuff. Then I figured that would land me pretty close to the top. So I looked at it like that. I didn't look at it like if everything's going good, I can be the guy. I looked at it as through the year, through all the good and the bad, I think I'm going to be there.
Well, you were in pretty good physical shape in those days. I mean, I don't know how much you trained or how much training was a big part of it, but you were in pretty physical shape. What about mental attitude for that season?
Well, that 83, I think, shaped me mentally more than I'd ever had before because I messed up my ankle. And as soon as I got that better, we went to Washington, D.C., and I won that Supercross, but I broke my left foot in the process. And it, you know, when you break it, you don't realize it's broken, and you got, you know, 8 or 9 laps left to go. You just get the job done, and I won that race. Afterwards, I'm like, I think I broke my foot. So I couldn't train. I wanted to in 83, but I had messed up my right ankle, so I was spending all week not riding either, or training. I was just doing physical therapy so I could even race on the weekend. And as soon as that got better, I broke my left foot, and I had to keep going to these races, and Hannah's winning them, and I'm getting 3rds and 4ths and dropping further back in the point standings. But then he broke his wrist, and unfortunately for him, he couldn't still race with that. With my feet, I could just sort of grit my teeth and get it done. But with a wrist, you can't hang on. So once that happened, that landed me close to the front. And then I was battling Mark Barnett, who I looked up to as well, you know, thinking he's tough, he's a bulldog. I'm not going to strength this guy. But he had his problems too with bikes, and then it came down to consistency. And the fact that I had raced some of those races were, if it hadn't have been for that Triple Crown, I may have just sat out. If it was just a 250 Supercross or just the outdoors, I might have thought, well, this is going to wreck my foot and maybe long term, so I might have sat out. But because they had that extra incentive, that Triple Crown deal, I'm like, it could be worth it. And it came down to just a couple of points for two of those titles.
Yeah. Well, I remember particularly the huge check that you were given by Wrangler at McMinnville in Minnesota.
Yeah,
I think it was that time. That was a big effort and a big thing. When you look back at that season, I mean, was there lessons to be learned from winning so much that year? What was the lessons you learned from it?
well, I was forced to get a little bit more grown up, a little bit more mature, and understand that the impact I had on people was a little bit more than I had thought about. I was just a kid with the blinders on, you know. I didn't really look around too much at other things. I was just having fun. And it all happened a year sooner than I expected it. So I had to sharpen up a little bit and grow up a little bit and realize that I had just been on the Motocross and Trophy des Nations teams in '82, and I came home from Europe, from Germany and Switzerland. We won that, and Donnie Hansen was the number one guy at Honda, and he was out, and I realized that this is serious, and take it serious, and if you're the number one guy, the press is going to be coming for you. The other riders are going to have their opinions. The chatter you hear, not like social media now, but what was available at the time, you hear things. And so you got to let that just kind of be like motivation or water off a duck's back. So you have to handle a lot of things and all the stuff I just mentioned has got nothing to do with riding a motorcycle. So I grew up off the bike and learning how to handle adversity. And when I got that, a championship for indoor, a championship for outdoor, that great big Wrangler check, and I still have something that Dunlop gave me that year, which was their rear tire and two front tires that I actually raced, and they had them coated in some cool, gold deal, and it's on a little pedestal at our house. Every morning when my wife and I have coffee, I'm just looking at it, and it's all three of those championships. It's one of those trophies that's really unique. And when you go through that much, pain and having to race in pain and not being able to ride and do your usual routine week in and week out, you're just hoping you can race and it's not going to hurt so bad when you got to shift and all that. And then you're rewarded with something that's never been done. Then it just changes the way you look at adversity. When you see a problem happening, you're figuring there's going to be a way through it, and it doesn't matter how much it hurts on whatever level, you can get past it, and it's going to be worth it.
What were the happiest moments of that '83 season for you?
Winning Anaheim, my first Supercross win. Couldn't believe it. I think I was holding a beer or something. I'm like, I'm going to drink this whole thing. I look back at that and just laugh, but I was so young and so new to it, and it was so unexpected, and in front of a sellout too, just amazing. And then just racing with Hannah, I thought that was pretty cool to be a fan of his in the late '70s. Just kind of just turning pro, and he was the guy. And then he was out for a bit with his leg injury. When he came back to the sport, and then signed with Honda, was on a team with me. I knew that he had big battles with Roger DeCoster, who just owned us, in motocross, especially in the U.S. And Hannah was the one that finally kind of took the crown from him in the Trans Ams. And to see those two sit on a bumper of a box van while we're out testing or something and just wondering, what are they talking about? You know, I had so much respect for both of them. So to be in a race following Hannah around, whether I beat him or not, just listening to how he would do the throttle and what gear he'd be in and the lines he would choose, I was just learning so much. And I think he got maybe a kick out of that too, seeing how hungry I was and thinking, well, that's fine. I'm going to beat you now while I can. And then when I'm done with this, I hope you do good. And he treated me like that, and I really appreciated it. I thought it was pretty cool to be on a team with DeCoster as my manager and boss, and to have Hannah come to that team and to be in that mix. It was just magical. And the year produced those kinds of results.
You were riding essentially for Roger DeCoster, who was then a 5-time world champion. What did that really mean to you, to work for someone that had achieved so much?
Well, I had seen Roger in your Portrait of a Champion movie and just watched it over and over and over, still have parts of it memorized. So I had a huge opinion of Roger, and to know what he had accomplished and then to be on the bike that he helped develop, and he was still testing with us. He was fast. I'd look at his lap time sometimes and be like, man, he's only a couple seconds off of us. We better pick it up. I was a fan of Roger, you know. If it had Sharpies then, I'd probably been like, hey, can you sign this? I was that much of a fan. That never wore off. I still get a little nervous around him.
Really?
Yeah, and same with Bob. So when I would have a poor result, I was embarrassed to look Roger in the eye, come back to the pits, put the bike on the stand, like, and I hold my head down like, I know he knows I can do better than that. And so I use that. I mean, I didn't use it necessarily as leverage. It was just there. I wanted to do good because he counted on me and he chose me, and he didn't have to. He just saw that, man, I might do well, and I didn't want to let him down.
Was he a good boss?
Yeah. And he didn't have to say anything either. I could tell. I could tell he was happy with how I was riding. And I could tell when he wasn't. And I already knew it before I looked at him. But there were times where he motivated me during the race, the same as my stepdad Gary would motivate me. You know, I didn't want to let certain people down, and they're up there on the list. And so I'd be comfortable in a second or a third place in a race, a big race, and think, I don't think Roger would be happy if I just sat here. Let me see if I can reach for a little more. And then I would, and then next thing you know, it changes the whole outcome. And so Roger was a huge influence on us like that. I don't know if that affected the other guys on the team, but because I knew Roger, knew of him, and was such a big fan, it had a big impact on me and my results, and I took myself and my job way more serious. I wasn't so concerned about what Honda thought. I was worried about what Roger thought.
Did you grow up wanting to be a motocross racer?
I didn't think about it. As a kid growing up in Dana Point, my real dad, Terry Martin, was a surfboard shaper for Hobie, and I was at the beach a lot. And then we got invited to go see a flat track race at Ascot in a TT, and then that led to a lot of the shapers, the big shapers, and On Any Sunday, Bruce Brown, and my dad, Terry, riding in the hills up above Dana Point. And that led to a motocross race, and then when my parents separated and my mom was with Gary, he was one of the pioneers of American motocross, and that's how I got to know about Roger, because Gary looked up to him. And then I started thinking about it. But I didn't think I was going to be really good at it. I just liked to do it. So I went from my Schwinn Stingray to a Yamaha Mini Enduro, and I wasn't very good because I didn't like taking chances. And racing, you got to take chances. You got to scare yourself a little bit, and I didn't like being scared. I just wanted to slide around and do wheelies and have fun. And because Gary was teaching, and I was just watching and observing mostly, not riding in the schools, but flagging and keeping it organized, I paid attention to everything. And I could see what was the guys that were listening and the guys that weren't listening. and how that would turn out. And so all of a sudden it started to click with me that if you just do this a certain way and do that a certain way, then this will happen. And I started to understand riding a motorcycle. So I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't crossing my fingers. I knew that if I wanted to get through a section a certain way or through a bunch of bumps or ruts or a scary downhill, I knew how to do it over and over again, so it wasn't scary. And that landed me pretty close to the front of the pack. So about maybe 16 years old, 15, 16, 5 years into it, I started thinking I'm going to be a professional racer, and I'd like to be one of the best.
Well, you turned out to be. It was, but it wasn't through lack of work, lack of commitment. I mean,
Yeah.
all of those are important. Could you itemize the things that set you up to be a successful racer as opposed to someone that just raced?
I think a big part of why I floated up to the very front of the racing scene was being, first you got to love it, and I love riding. I love riding my bicycle, and I like being able to wheelie the furthest and slide the most, and I had showing off kind of. I liked that aspect of it, and so I was motivated to improve. And when it went to motocross, I think it wasn't so much that I had the ability. I didn't know what I had. I just had a love for it. But Gary was really good at being able to teach it and to point out what was working and why. And once I started to understand what was going to happen if you're sliding sideways and hit a bump, it's going to compress and rebound and swap that way, and that's not good. So how do you keep that from happening? And once I understood how to ride the bike, then it was just a matter of setting a goal and then just creating a map to get there. And I got good at that. And I was real observant. I knew that I wasn't necessarily the fastest in a corner, but I could pick out the guys that were and try to figure out how they did that. And then I got actually kind of I think you have a lot of free time as a racer, and so I would just entertain myself sometimes with trying to imitate somebody like Barnett or imitate Hannah. What makes Hannah stand out? And I would imitate him.
What did make Hannah stand out?
He was aggressive, and he would charge into a corner harder than anybody else, and he rode more on the balls of his feet, and he was harder on the gas in the air before he had landed onto the ground, and so when he landed, he would just shoot out from the jump, not just land and take off. He would land and explode away. And he could come into a corner harder than anybody else and just jump on the front brake. And so when I rode his bike at Honda in tests, once in a while we'd ride each other's bikes. I noticed how hard the power hit, and I noticed how stiff that front brake was. It was like a road race front brake. I mean, if you just barely touched it, it would skid. And he had real stiff forks, so he could hit things really fast and get away with it. And I started thinking, okay, I need to be more aggressive then. So I would ride more aggressive and scare myself a little bit, and then that became more normal. And then next thing you know, my lap times are coming down. And I liked watching Brock, how he could just, take the first 2 or 3 laps of a race and just have a huge lead already. Like, how in the world could a guy be that far ahead so quick, so often? So I analyzed that. And I analyzed how quick that Wardy and O'Mara and Barnett could just slingshot out of a corner, being 125 guys. So I had a 125 practice bike, so I could learn how to do that. And so I was good and observant from being around Gary and his schools to look at what made the other guys good and then try to figure out how to do that myself. And I ultimately came out in that in terms of my style and technique, but I was using a lot of what the other guys had done and figuring out how they did it. So that was in my bag of tricks as well.
Were you guys friends then? I mean, you've mentioned some pretty big names in motocross, and I can understand how you could learn some from others, and I'm sure a lot of people learn from you. But were you guys friends then? Did you talk about motocross then? Did you compare notes?
It's amazing how much I could hate Rick Johnson on the weekend and then go to the mall with his girlfriend and me and my girlfriend and visit. Or not really care that much for Jeff Ward because, you know, I didn't like it that he could just catch and pass me and pull away. It irritated me. But then we could go golf and laugh. So, you know, we didn't go out of our way to be friends with each other, but I think there was a mutual respect there because I knew how much work I put into it. And for those guys to be as good as they were and to catch my eye the way they could do certain things really good, and I wish I could do it like that, I had a bunch of respect for them. And especially the guys who were a little bit older than me that had already been good at it, Barnett and Hannah, for example, and Brock. I just respected them enough to, you know, give them their free time and not get in their hair, but when I got to be around them, I thought it was pretty cool. And that's what I enjoyed about being on the Motocross to Nations team, because you got 4 guys that usually don't like each other, usually trying to beat one another, and then you have to work together for those couple of weeks. And so I learned a lot during those times.
Let's talk about the Trophy to Nations, because that's something that we don't pay much attention to in America generally. But at that time, in the 80s, it was a big thing. It was a big thing for you guys to go to Europe, and it was a big thing for you to beat those people literally at their own game, because they invented motocross pretty much. And all of a sudden, the Americans went over there and whipped their ass, basically.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the Trophy to Nations experience.
For me, looking over at the Europe scene and the GPs, I mean, it just didn't get any better than that. But then in America, Supercross, things started happening, and then I think we started hurrying up a little bit because those races were shorter, more like sprints, and then that kind of carried over into motocross. So the American riders were getting fast, and Hannah went over in like '78 to one of the Nations races, and Heikki Mikkola beat him. And I'm like, wow, I know how fast Hannah is, and if he's getting beat by that guy, wow. So that caught my attention. And then in 1982, our top rider, Donnie Hansen, was injured, and I had to fly over last minute. And I didn't even know where Frankfurt, Germany was. And so it was like, learn quick and don't let the team down. And they had won it in '81, shocked the world. In '82, it was like, well, that's not going to happen again. And then Magoo was on that team, Danny Chandler, who was wild. And I don't know really what anyone expected of him. And then the best rider, Hansen, was hurt. And I'm replacing him, and I wasn't even considered for the team, but I was an alternate because of Honda. So it was a totally unexpected thing for the team to win in '81 and '82, maybe more so, because Donnie was gone and I was filling his shoes, and Jim Gibson wasn't necessarily a top pick, but we won it anyway. And so we learned that being team riders and racing as a team was going to make us really strong. And we got confident from that. So winning a couple of times in Europe, it just made us feel like we could compete on a world stage, and that Supercross probably helped us a little bit to be able to be quicker and feel like when you're in a stadium full of people, everybody's watching you. So if you make a mistake, it's embarrassing, you know? Where in an outdoor, you can kind of hide a little bit. And so I think we just got a little bit more cleaned up and less mistakes and a little bit more aggression. And that seemed to be the formula to land us on the front and the best in the world.
Was Roger DaCosta team manager at that time?
Yes.
How much of a help was his experience in Europe to helping you guys adapt?
A ton. Roger's influence for us in Europe was, where are we going to go practice, and who are the people who are going to help us get around and go from country to country and figure out the gas and the parts and the workings of the team. It's not easy to just go over to another country with 4 guys and that don't like each other, maybe 4 different manufacturers. Share information, but not too much. And the year that blew my mind really was in 1983. We're in Belgium, and the Belgian team was strong. They had 4 really strong riders. And Roger's from Belgium, and he's helping us. And so I don't know, I didn't really talk to him about that, how he felt about it, but it was a big deal to beat the Belgian team in Belgium. with the Belgian team manager as our manager, you know. So, I mean, it was maybe extra motivation for Roger, you know, in some ways. Maybe uncomfortable, I don't know, but he was on our side. And having Roger on your side anywhere that you are is a good thing. You know what he can do and what he can influence. And he influenced all of us in a really strong way, and he was able to balance our egos and our, you know, stubborn points and get us to function together as a team. Like I said, that first year I went, I didn't know what to expect. And there was a lot expected of me, and Roger handled that really well. He just was like, you can do it. Just go out there and do what you've been doing. And he gave me the confidence to do that.
It must be kind of hard to argue with or be a struggle, you know, to really go against someone that's already proved himself a 5-time world champion. And that alone must have given you confidence in the knowledge and what he was asking you to do, because he knew it could be done. He knew you could do it.
If Roger was telling me that a shock was going to work, I was like, okay, all right, it's going to work. So I would just head out to the race and feel like I had an advantage on other people. Perhaps they didn't even change the shock for all I know. I'm thinking about it years later. But I believed him. And if he was acting confident that we could win as a team or I could win as an individual here in the U.S., then I believed him. And I didn't want to let him down. So I went out there and rode like that.
Do you think your experience at Honda would have been different without DaCosta?
Absolutely. If Roger hadn't been at Honda and it had been just me and my mechanic, I had Paul Turner the first year, brilliant, and then Cliff White, 2 different personalities. Paul was kind of outgoing and a brilliant guy, but kind of funny and liked to hike, and he was a pretty good rider as well. And then Cliff had a different personality, completely different. And I got to know him, and we functioned fantastic together. But if it had just been us and not Dave Arnold's influence and Roger DaCosta's influence, and my respect for Roger, the dynamic would have been a little bit different. And had I done the same results, it's hard to say, but it was cooler to have Roger there at the team, you know, because if anything was, one of those plates on the stick started to wobble, you know, Roger was there. And he was the reason they were all spinning in the first place, it seemed like to me. And so to have the equipment we had, which had a lot to do with Roger, to see him out at tests, riding the same equipment we were, going just about as fast, it just felt like we better win. If I don't win, I'm going to be mad. I expect to. Somebody on the team expects to win, and one of us usually was, which kind of was the high tide floating the rest of the ships at the team, and so we would strive to be as fast as that guy or faster. And so somebody at Honda was usually leading the points, just won the last race, was the defending champion, and when you're that close to something like that, then, you know, for me anyway, I took it serious and figured I better win or I'm going to hear about it.
Yeah. What was your relationship with Honda, the company, as opposed to Roger as an individual?
I didn't really have one. I didn't think too much about it. I didn't have an agent or anybody. I would just go and do my own contracts and be scared to death, sit there, and whatever they offered me, I'm like, okay. I didn't really have a leverage, I didn't think. So I rode for whatever they offered, which was very little the first year and not much more the next year. And then because I won everything in '83, I went from making not a lot of money to more money I ever dreamed of. I was like, I'm rich, you know? And so I just started buying land in Virginia and eventually a whole racetrack. And then in 1986, I had my own 500 National. 10 years after watching Roger win a Trans Am there, I bought the place, had a 500 National there, and won both motos. That stands out. That was a cool thing. And it was really just a relationship with my mechanic, with Roger, with Dave, and with the other riders. That was Honda to me. And when I went to Japan and saw Honda and the factory and stuff, I just felt like a fish out of water. I didn't think much about the company. I just liked the product I was on and the people that I was around all the time every week.
I keep going back in my mind to Washougal in 1983. And it wasn't the race that I remember so much. It was the fact that you and I went up in an airplane.
Yeah.
Back in those days, I was doing a lot of flying, and Mount St. Helens had just blown its roof, and we went and rented an airplane and flew over. You tell the story. What do you remember?
I think I remember seeing you there in Portland at the hotel, and talking about Mount St. Helens, and you flew, and would I want to get in an airplane and fly up there and look at it? I was like, yeah, let's do that. I wasn't afraid to fly or anything. And as a matter of fact, I was wanting to fly myself. You know, I didn't have time. But I knew at some point that I'd probably get an airplane and fly. And the fact that you already did, I'm like, well, then this is cool. So we got in and flew up there, and it was beautiful forest, just spectacular view all the way up there until we got just north of Mount St. Helens, which only blew up like 1980. This was 83, so not a lot of vegetation or regrowth had taken place yet. And so everywhere northeast or where that blew up was completely like some sort of Mars, other planet, moonscape. You know, it was nothing. It was incredible to see, flying around it a little bit. I'll never forget that. And then on the way back in too, to your credit, you had gotten something over the radio saying, hey, there's a big plane coming into land, so either do it quick or wait. And you were like, well, we can just do it quick. And so you were like Hannah in a hurry and just banked it in and over the Columbia River, and we landed it. And it was exhilarating, the whole thing. I loved that.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I remember flying a lot. I was very much into flying at that era, and for several years afterwards. But as I've gotten older, it's just become more and more difficult. It's more and more expensive. That's one of the things I envy about Bob Hanna. I don't envy much of him. Is his ability to continue to fly, and fly very well. I mean, he's an accomplished pilot. But that particular thing. The other thing I remember that sticks in my mind also was that we drove on the morning of the McMinnville race, and I'm sitting in the passenger seat holding this big 16 millimeter heavy camera, and you're driving and talking to me about your aspirations for the race that day. And I'm holding the camera and I'm focusing it and I'm getting the frame right and we're jiggling a little bit. And I'm going, this guy is just as calm as they come. He's not going to go race a big national race today. He's out for just a drive, and I was quite impressed with how calm you were.
Yeah, I think at that point, driving to Millville for the final race of '83, I had already won the Supercross title at the Rose Bowl, and all kinds of pressure in the final round, and Barnett, who I was battling with, crashed right beside me going into the first turn, so I just went into relax mode, figuring, well, you know, it's going to be easy. Then he rode maybe his best race of the year. And then I had to get in a hurry and went, so the pressure was huge. And I'd already been through that. And then the week prior to Millville, I went 1-1 and kind of solidified my grasp on the 250 title. So I didn't have a lot of pressure for that. And the Grand National thing, you know, that Wrangler put up, I felt like I had a good chance to win it, but at that point it was kind of odd that I'm battling somebody for that title that was in a different class. So I was kind of in neutral, you know, on that drive. Like, I don't really know what to feel, you know. I'm already pretty happy. I've already won the Supercross title, and it looks like I'm going to win the 250 title unless I completely mess up. I don't see that happening. And if I win the whole thing, well, that's just icing on the cake. So I remember that being my thought. So that probably came across. I remember watching that in years since, and and thinking that I was really nervous to be on camera more than I was nervous to race. And because that doesn't happen always, you know, to be on film like that. But I said something like, I don't have a worry in the world. I'm just going to go out there and go fast. And that's what I did.
Actually, I was more nervous last week than I am this week. This week is, I don't have a worry in the world. If I win everything, it's just a bonus for me. And if I don't win anything at all, I already won the Supercross championship and a Grand Prix, and I get to go to the Trophy of Nations. And if I completely blow it today, I've had a pretty successful year. So I'm not worried about anything at all. I'm just going to go out there and go fast.
It all came out.
Yeah, it worked out.
Okay, good. Do you look back on your motocross career with a lot of love and excitement and happiness, or do you look back with many regrets?
No, I loved my whole career from start to end, and the ending, you know, I wish it didn't end the way it did, but it ended on a high note. I was winning everything and capable of winning everything, and in '87, probably, if you asked a lot, you know, a whole bunch of people, you get a high percentage of people thinking that I was probably going to win. I felt like I was going to win. And I always figured that if I was getting ready to stop racing and retire, that I wouldn't want to retire kind of on a low note. I'd want to be winning and then just be able to say, okay, that's enough. And it didn't happen the way you'd want it to, but it did happen like that. And I was up on top and capable of winning, and then it was over. So that's kind of frozen in time that way. And so I look at it that way as much as, well, shoot, it didn't end like I wanted. But as far as my coming up through the ranks and kind of cutting my number in half each year and enjoying every step of the way, being a fan of the other guys that I was racing with and that never wearing off, winning my own national, having Roger be my team manager, having teammates like O'Mara and Hannah and Lachine. I don't think it could have been any better. I loved it all, and I look back at it with a lot of good memories.
Well, as I said in the beginning, the inspiration for me came from your recovery and winning the world events that you won as a wheelchair athlete. Can you talk to me much about how that came about, and was it the same drive that drove you to become a motocross champion that carried through to become a wheelchair athlete champion?
I think, you know, getting hurt was just the last thing I thought was going to happen, the way that I got hurt. And then, you know, to go and do an Ironman triathlon in Hawaii. My wife and I went there on our honeymoon in '86, watched it, and then spent the rest of our honeymoon in Hawaii. And I thought, man, I want to come over here and do this Ironman someday. Really want to do that. I don't know why exactly, but in motocross, it may sound, I don't mean it to sound like it was easy, but the way that I sort of chipped away at it and had a plan and a goal and how to make a map to get there and just achieve those things and then do it, it did kind of feel easy to me, and it was an expectation after a while. And so when I got hurt, I had to start completely all over again. And having that goal of wanting to go do the Ironman was like, well, that's off the table. There's no way. And then 12 years later, 12 or 13 years later, I'm floating in the bay in Kona getting ready to do the Ironman, and I had chipped away at the same way I did motocross, the same way. How do you swim? What's the technique? And what's the process? And how much do I need to do? And the same with the bike. There wasn't even such a thing as a bike that you could pedal with your arms back then. And I kind of had to invent some different ways to do it. Unfortunately, Ironman was versatile enough and willing to have an athlete like myself come in and do it. It just so happened that when I wanted to do it, I'm up against a Navy SEAL who's on paper a better man in every way. He's got a lower level of injury, he's lighter, he's tougher, he's Rambo, and he wants to win this Ironman thing is just as bad as I do, if not more, and he's way more qualified. I mean, motocross, I may have had a good way of looking at it and getting prepared for Ironman, but to be that fast, I wasn't ready. So he handed me my butt the first year. And it turned into a 3-year rivalry, and it was like having a Johnson or a Hanna or somebody to shoot for and try to beat in this Hawaii Ironman event. And I thought more about that than I did the distance and the heat and the conditions and the wind and all of that stuff. And so it was motocross gave me the ability to have a goal and figure out how to achieve it. And to be able to go and do that at Ironman. Later I realized, man, that didn't come natural. Swimming with like big sharks and fish and stuff way out there, it just scared the heck out of me. And it always did. I never got over it. You're swimming 2.5 miles out there in the ocean and you can't see the bottom, and if you got an issue, you just have to swim through it. And I had issues, you know, I got really scared a few times out there. And then riding 112 miles through lava fields and, you know, a crazy heat index and humidity. There's no place out there to pull over if you got an issue. That you're just in the middle of a big island, which is so vast that if you got a problem out there, you have to ride through it. And then you have to do a marathon. So that, I guess that attracted me because motocross seemed kind of easy to me after a while, and Ironman was something that I thought, I don't know if I'm that tough. I just don't know, and I want to go find out. And then I ended up with a guy a whole lot tougher than me in my division. So as fortunate as I was to be in motocross at the time that I was, and to have all the pieces of the puzzle in place like they were to be so special, it was the same when I did the Ironman. I mean, if I'd have just gone over and done it once and got a t-shirt and a medal, it wouldn't have had the same impact on me as it did to have to go over there and race against a Navy SEAL. Like, those guys are tough, and I wasn't that tough. And he exposed all my weaknesses, and I hated it, and I wanted to get stronger. The very thing that attracted to me to that race in the first place was, am I tough enough to do it? On top of that, to race against a guy that's a lot tougher than me, I'm grateful for that. So I think in life, in motocross, in Ironman, and the things that I've dealt with in the condition that I'm in, I don't welcome the hardships. I don't like it, but I realize that in those valleys, that's when you grow, and that's when you teach yourself something and surprise yourself. And then the byproduct of that is, down the road, people were watching that and were super moved and inspired and achieved a lot of great things and just in watching you do it. And so I didn't set out to inspire people necessarily, but I'm happy that I have. And I think you just gotta take the situations that you're given and press on and do it the best way that you can. That's what motocross gave me the tools to do, and I've just carried that same kind of thought process through the different parts of life. And I don't expect it to always be easy. You know, I did, and then when I got surprised 3 or 4 times and hit 3 or 4 rock bottoms, I realized, okay, it's not always going to be easy, but those tough times, is as much of a bummer as they are, they actually produce some really fantastic results later if you just stick with it.
What motivates you today?
Oh, just knowing what I've done, and that no matter what comes along, there'll be a way through it, and there'll be some sort of reward on the other side, whether you just are happy that you had the endurance to get through things, to see how that may have impacted somebody else, and meet more people and that have been through things and have hope and surprises. You know, I never thought I'd be playing golf with Brock Glover, you know, and it's pretty cool.
Can you beat him?
No. Brock is, I look up to him like I did when he jumped on a 500 off those 125s and won that title the first year. I'm like, how in the world? Go from a 125 to a 500 and win that. And it'll take a long time before I can get up to being able to hit the ball that far, but I enjoy being out there for several hours in just beautiful landscapes, where you just kind of want to take a picture. And you get super mad at yourself because you screw up a shot, and the very next shot you hit a good one and you're stoked. And at the end of the day, you got to hang out with somebody that for a few hours that usually you just see briefly, and to see Brock like that's a surprise, something I never would have expected. To do the Ironman, never would have expected that I would have done it in the condition that I'm in. And then to do some of the training that I do led to doing the race across America, and then meeting Dan Gurney and his sons at All American Racers. I would have never imagined that would happen. But when you just keep pressing forward, and you're open-minded to things, and you don't just look at something as like, oh, well, that's impossible. Maybe not. Maybe if you just keep pressing on, something will happen, and then that opens the door to a whole bunch more. And then later you look back at it and just go, man, I can't believe all that happened. And that's been my life.
David Bailey, you are still an inspiration to me, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time out to come spend with us today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
This has been the MotoStar Motorcycle Podcast, brought to you by Dunlop Motorcycle Tires, the official tires of Moto America. We will return with more of the world's greatest motorcycle personalities and racing icons. Follow us through Facebook and on motostar.com.